They called us poison breathers. The moment Captain Jack Thompson stepped out of the human delegation pod onto the gleaming floor of the Galactic Council chamber, he knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. The assembled aliens, insectoid Thorians, plant-like Malorians, and the energy-based Verics recoiled in horror. Their movements were unmistakable. They weren't greeting humanity's ambassador. They were fleeing from a biological weapon. "Containment breach! Toxic life form!" screamed the translator in Jack's ear. The security drones swarmed around him, and Dr. Sarah Williams, their energy restraints flickering dangerously close to human skin. What the hell? Jack managed before a shimmering barrier snapped into place around them, sealing them within the remnants of Earth's atmosphere they'd brought aboard. First contact, the culmination of decades of preparation, had just imploded in 90 seconds flat. Dr. Williams checked her instruments, her face paling. "Jack, they're not reacting to us. They're reacting to our air." The realization hit him like a physical blow. Oxygen, the very element humans needed to survive, was toxic to the dominant species of the galaxy. The cosmic joke was almost too perfect. Humans had spent centuries fearing alien invasions when they themselves were walking biological hazards. "Quarantine protocols engaged," announced the station's AI with mechanical indifference. Estimated containment breach, Class 7 biohazard event. Hours passed in the sealed pod as Jack and Sarah watched alien scientists analyze their readings from a safe distance, their multifaceted eyes and sensory appendages conveying universal disgust. Jack paced the increasingly stale air of their prison, his mind racing through diplomatic scenarios, none of which had covered "your species is naturally toxic." "Our oxygen reserves are critically low," Sarah reported, her scientific demeanor cracking under the strain. "We have maybe 18 hours before." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The bitter irony wasn't lost on Jack. After countless movies depicting aliens harvesting humans, it turned out humans themselves were the deadly invaders, not by choice or malice, but by the simple act of breathing. "They're going to let us suffocate," Jack said, watching the alien delegation debate from behind their barrier. "They can't risk opening the pod to rescue us without potentially exposing their entire station." Sarah's hands trembled as she worked her datapad. "Oxygen levels at 17% and falling. I'm getting dizzy, Jack." Jack felt it too, the heaviness in his lungs, the pounding in his temples. Humanity's grand entrance to the galactic stage would end with 2 corpses and a sealed container labeled extreme hazard. With nothing left to lose, Jack connected his datapad to the station's communication system. "Listen to me," he broadcasted, his voice rough from the thinning air. "I know you see us as a threat, but we didn't come here to harm you. The very element that's poisonous to you is essential for our survival." No response. "Our air is running out," he continued, desperation bleeding into his voice. "If there's any way to communicate, any way to find a solution, we're willing to try anything." Sarah's scientific mind, even under duress, continued processing their predicament. "Jack," she whispered, her eyes suddenly wide, "what if our poison is their medicine?" "What?" Jack turned to her, confused by her sudden shift. "In Earth medicine, controlled doses of toxins are sometimes the most effective treatments," she explained, tapping furiously on her datapad. "What if oxygen, in carefully measured amounts, could be beneficial to them?" Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered in Jack's chest. "Station AI," he commanded, "transmit all data on human cellular respiration and oxygen metabolism to the Council's scientific team. Mark it as potential medical research." For 12 more hours they waited, breathing the increasingly stale air as their oxygen levels dipped below 12%. Jack's vision began to blur. Sarah had stopped responding coherent. The quarantine shield between them and the alien council seemed to waver, or perhaps that was just his oxygen-deprived brain playing tricks. Then, remarkably, the barrier flickered and disappeared. A Thorian scientist approached cautiously, encased in a protective suit, its multifaceted eyes studying them with what might have been curiosity rather than fear. The translator crackled to life. "Life-giving poison," the alien chittered. The translation struggling with concepts that had no direct equivalence. "Your exhaled molecules. They stimulate cellular regeneration in controlled micro-exposures." Jack's oxygen-starved brain struggled to process the words. "You mean, our breath can heal you?" The Thorian's antennae twitched in what might have been affirmation. Preliminary tests suggest your toxic element could revolutionize our medical treatments. We request permission to conduct further research under controlled conditions. As fresh air, alien breathable but specially filtered for humans, hissed into their chamber, Jack exchanged a look of stunned disbelief with Sarah. Their greatest weakness, the very thing that had nearly condemned them to death, might become humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy. The poison breathers, it seemed, had just become the medicine makers. The quarantine pod that had nearly become Jack's coffin was now his office. 6 months after that disastrous first contact, Captain Jack Thompson found himself at the center of the galaxy's most unlikely diplomatic mission. The humans were no longer seen as walking biohazards. They were walking pharmacies. "Let me get this straight," Jack said, pinching the bridge of his nose as he faced the Thorian delegation across a specially designed chamber. A transparent barrier separated them, with carefully calibrated vents allowing precise amounts of human exhaled oxygen to pass through. "You want to triple our oxygen export quota, but you're offering half the mineral rights we requested." The lead Thorian's antennae twitched in what Jack had learned was amusement. "Your position is optimistic, Captain. The Council has already been generous in allowing your kind unrestricted access to barren moons," Jack countered, fighting to keep frustration from his voice. "Meanwhile, Earth is converting entire continents into oxygen farms to meet your demands." Behind him, Dr. Sarah Williams cleared her throat, a subtle reminder to maintain composure. The aliens still reacted with instinctive fear to human anger, interpreting emotional displays as potential toxin release. Jack softened his tone. "My point is that partnership requires balance. Earth needs something beyond goodwill in return for becoming the galaxy's breathing apparatus." 6 months of negotiations had taught Jack this delicate dance, pushing hard enough to advance human interests, while never so hard that the Council retreated into their initial terror of the oxygen breathers. It was exhausting. Later, in their private quarters, sterilized chambers that had become less prison-like as weeks passed, Sarah reviewed the day's medical data. Their cellular regeneration rates have improved again. The Malorians' agricultural division is reporting 30% faster growth cycles with controlled oxygen exposure. Jack slumped onto his bunk, bone-tired. "Great. We're miracle workers." Sarah studied him. "You don't sound thrilled about saving alien lives and revolutionizing their technology." "I'm thrilled about the not dying in space part," Jack said, staring at the ceiling. "Less thrilled about being valued exclusively for our biological waste products." That was the core of it, the bitter pill beneath their miraculous salvation. Humans weren't accepted as equals, they were tolerated as necessary resources. Jack sometimes wondered if being feared had been better than being harvested. "Ambassador Thompson," the station AI's voice interrupted his brooding. "The Veric High Command requests your presence at the medical bay. Immediate." The medical bay had transformed over months from a quarantine facility to a bustling research center. Humans in special containment suits worked alongside alien scientists, their exhaled breath captured in complex filtration systems that extracted pure oxygen for medical applications. The Veric beings of pure energy contained in force fields pulsed with unusual intensity as Jack entered. Unlike the insectoid Thorians or plant-like Malorians, the Veric communicated through energy fluctuations that the translators struggled to interpret. "Witness," the Veric commander's translation crackled, gesturing toward a containment pod where a damaged Veric flickered weakly, its energy field unstable, fatal degradation, imminent dissolution. Jack had learned enough about Veric physiology to recognize a dying being. "I'm sorry, but how can I help?" "Direct application," the commander responded. "Not filtration. Raw human breath." Jack looked at the attending Thorian physician, whose compound eyes managed to convey alarm despite their alien structure. "That concentration could damage multiple systems," the Thorian chittered. "The protocols exist for safety." "The protocols condemn this soldier," the Veric interrupted, its force field flaring. "We request direct intervention." Jack understood the significance. The Veric were asking him to break every safety measure established since first contact, to deliberately expose an alien to concentrated oxygen in a desperate attempt to save a life. "If this works," Sarah whispered, "it changes everything. If it fails, we're back to being monsters," Jack finished, his throat tight. He made his decision. "I'll do it, but I want something in return." The Varric commander pulsed agreement. Jack approached the containment field, his heart hammering. The security drones hovering nearby represented the station's last defense against a human gone rogue. One wrong move and they would neutralize him. Permanent. "Seal the chamber," he ordered, stepping into the containment pod with the dying Varric. "And get me a direct line to council leadership. They'll want to witness this." As the pod sealed, Jack removed his breathing filter. For the first time since arriving at the station, he exhaled directly into alien space, his breath mixing with the energy being's failing field. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Varric's flickering energy stabilized, then intensified, pulsing with renewed vigor. Across the chamber, alarms blared as sensors registered the unfiltered oxygen release. Toxin levels exceeding safety parameters, the AI warned, but no one moved to stop the process. The dying Varric was visibly regenerated. When Jack emerged 30 minutes later, pale but triumphant, the medical bay had filled with council representatives, their fear and fascination palpable. The saved Varric soldier pulsed with health, its energy signature stronger than before exposure. "As promised," Jack said hoarsely, his voice raw from the controlled breathing exercises he'd performed. "I've demonstrated what direct human assistance can accomplish. Now let's renegotiate our arrangement as equals, not as resources." That event marked the turning point. The news spread through the Galactic Council like wildfire. Direct human intervention had saved a life when technology had failed. Suddenly, humans weren't just suppliers of a valuable resource, they were indispensable. Within weeks, Earth's status had been upgraded from monitored species to essential allied civilization. Trade agreements were revised, technology exchanges accelerated, and human quarters on council stations expanded from sterile pods to comfortable ambassadorial suites. As Earth's primary representative, Jack should have felt vindicated. Instead, unease gnawed at him as he witnessed the galaxy's growing dependence on human biology. "They're building oxygen treatment centers on every major world," he told Sarah one evening, pacing their newly spacious quasars. "Constructing specialized ships to transport human personnel. The Thorian High Command is talking about stationing human medics on their military vessels." Sarah looked up from her research data. "Isn't this what we wanted? Recognition? Value?" "Value is a commodity," Jack said quietly. "What happens when they decide they need more of us than we can provide, or when they want to control the supply directly?" His concerns materialized faster than even he had anticipated. 3 months after the Varric incident, Jack found himself facing the full council in formal session, a rare honor that immediately triggered his suspicion. The Malorian elder, its chlorophyll-rich skin glowing under the chamber lights, spoke first. "We propose expanded human settlement within council space. Designated worlds suitable for human physiology would be provided in exchange for permanent oxygen production facilities." Jack maintained his diplomatic mask, but internally, alarms blared. And these settlements would be under whose jurisdiction? "Joint administration," the Thorian representative chittered, "with council oversight to ensure optimal production." There it was, the first step toward controlled human colonies. "Farms, not settlements." "Earth appreciates the council's offer," Jack replied carefully. "However, human expansion will remain under Earth governance. We are allies, not subjects." The chamber erupted in multilingual objections. The Varric representative pulsed aggressively, its translator struggling to keep pace. "The oxygen producers cannot dictate terms. The resource is too valuable for single-species control." Jack stood his ground. "Humans are not oxygen producers. We are a sovereign species whose biology happens to be beneficial to council races. Any arrangement that treats us as resources rather than partners is unacceptable." He returned to his quarters that night to find an urgent message from Earth. The council had bypassed his authority, reaching out directly to Earth's government with offers of technology protection and resources in exchange for oxygen production rights. "They're trying to split Earth's leadership against us," Sarah observed, reading over his shoulder. "Classic divide and conquer." Jack stared at the message, ice forming in his gut. "They've moved from fearing us to needing us, and now they want to own us." That night, As artificial gravity maintained its reassuring pull and recycled air circulated through their quarters, Jack made a decision that would either secure humanity's place among the stars or condemn them forever. "Contact Earth Command," he told Sarah. "Tell them to halt all oxygen exports immediately. Not a single canister leaves the system until the Council recognizes our full autonomy." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's playing with fire, Jack. Half the Galactic Council's medical systems rely on our exports now." "Exactly," Jack said grimly. "They feared us because we could poison them by accident. It's time they respected us because we could help or withhold that help by choice." The response came swiftly and predictably. Council security forces surrounded the human compound officially for protection, but practically for containment. The oxygen breathers had gone from feared to valued to too valuable to leave uncontrolled. Jack watched from his window as additional drones patrolled the perimeter. His gambit had transformed humans from resources to threats once again, but this time the threat was intentional. The galaxy, having tasted the miracle of oxygen, had become addicted, and now the supplier was cutting them off. "Captain," the station AI announced, its tone carefully neutral, "the full council requests your immediate presence. Armed escort will be provided." Jack straightened his jacket, meeting Sarah's worried gaze. "If I'm not back in 2 hours, implement emergency protocol Omega," she finished. "I know." As he was led through corridors now empty of civilian traffic, Jack couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Humans had finally achieved the recognition they sought among the stars, not through their technology, culture, or diplomacy, but through their breath. The simplest, most fundamental act of human existence had become their greatest weapon and their gravest vulnerability. The council chamber doors slid open, revealing not just council representatives, but military commanders from every major species. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a tribunal. Jack stepped forward, breathing deeply, an act that once inspired terror and now represented power, and prepared to fight for humanity's future among the stars that had first feared them, then needed them, and now sought to control them. The council chamber felt like an execution ground. Jack Thompson stood alone before the assembled leaders of the Galactic Council, the air around him crackling with tension. The same beings who had once recoiled from his breath now coveted it. Not as equals, but as owners. "Captain Thompson," the Thorian High Counselor began, her mandibles clicking with barely restrained anger, "your unilateral embargo constitutes an act of aggression against the Council. Millions depend on oxygen treatments. Already critical patients suffer." Jack kept his voice steady. The suffering could end immediately if the Council recognized Earth's sovereignty and humans' right to self-determination. The Malorian elder rustled with displeasure, leaves shimmering under the chamber lights. "Your species exists in a toxic bubble within our galaxy. Your survival depends entirely on our tolerance. And your medical systems, agricultural advances, and energy grids now depend entirely on our biology," Jack countered. "Seems we've achieved a balance worth respecting." The very commander pulsed forward, its force field flaring with what Jack had learned to recognize as indignation. The resource cannot dictate terms to those who provide its sanctuary. That word resource ignited something primal in Jack's chest. "Is that what humanity is to you? A resource? After everything we've shared?" "You are what your biology makes you," the Thorian stated flatly. "Valuable but dangerous. The Council has decided. Human settlements will be established under direct Council supervision. Oxygen production will resume within 3 cycles. Jack stood perfectly still, understanding exactly what remained unspoken. This wasn't a negotiation, it was annexation. And if Earth refuses? The Council chamber grew unnaturally silent. Finally, the Thorian spoke, her voice clicking with cold precision. "The Council has already dispatched a contingent to your solar system. Your government will understand the necessity of cooperation." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jack's mind raced through scenarios, none good. Earth's defenses, while formidable against conventional threats, were untested against alien technology. A show of force would be enough to coerce Earth's leaders into submission. "I see," Jack said, his voice perfectly controlled while rage built inside him. "Then this meeting is adjourned." As security drones escorted him back to the human compound, Jack activated the subdermal communicator embedded beneath his wrist. Sarah, implement Omega, now. Within minutes, alarms blared throughout the station. The human compound was sealing itself, not to keep aliens out, but to keep oxygen in. "What's happening?" demanded the Thorian security chief when they reached the human sector, finding hermetically sealed doors. "Simple economics," Jack replied. "You've made oxygen valuable. We're controlling the supply." Inside the compound, Sarah had orchestrated precisely what they'd planned for this worst-case scenario. Every filtration system that had been feeding oxygen into the station's medical and research facilities was disabled. The oxygen stockpiles were secured behind human-controlled barriers. "Captain," the station AI's voice announced with unusual urgency, "Council leadership demands immediate restoration of oxygen systems." "Tell them I'm open to negotiation," Jack replied. "As equal." The standoff lasted 16 hours. Reports filtered in of deteriorating patients in medical bays, of agricultural experiments failing, of Veric energy systems becoming unstable without oxygen catalysts. The Council had never anticipated how quickly their newfound dependency would become their vulnerability. On the 17th hour, Jack received the summons he'd been waiting for, not to the Council chamber but to the observation dome where the Veric High Commander waited alone. The Veric pulsed gently as Jack entered, its energy pattern subdued. "You have proven your point, Captain." "Have I?" Jack maintained his guard, suspecting a trap. "Your species possesses not just a biological advantage, but a willingness to leverage it." The Council underestimated both. The Veric's force field rippled. "But you have miscalculated as well." Jack tensed. "How so?" "Follow me." The Veric led him to a restricted section of the medical bay Jack had never been permitted to enter. Inside, dozens of containment pods housed alien subjects, but these weren't patients. They were changing. A Thorian researcher approached, her exoskeleton bearing unusual markings Jack had never seen on their species before. "Sustained oxygen exposure is producing evolutionary responses," she explained, leading him to a pod containing a young Thorian whose exoskeleton had developed strange, permeable sections. "Adaptation?" Jack asked, stunned by the implications. "More than adaptation. Transformation." The researcher's antennae quivered with what might have been excitement or fear. 5% of exposed subjects now process oxygen without harm. Some appear to be developing oxygen-dependent cellular structures that enhance their capabilities. Jack moved from pod to pod, witnessing the evidence with his own eyes. Malorians whose chlorophyll had altered to process oxygen as a catalyst, rather than a toxin. Veric, whose energy fields had stabilized into new configurations that integrated oxygen molecules. "You're evolving," he whispered. "Not by choice," the Veric commander responded. "Your biological weapon has infected us at the genetic level." The embargo accelerated exposure protocols we had been conducting in secret. The pieces clicked into place. The Council hadn't just been harvesting oxygen. They'd been studying its long-term effects, preparing for this inevitable moment of conflict by trying to eliminate their dependency. "So you don't need us anymore," Jack concluded, his stomach dropping. "You can produce your own UX-intolerant subjects." "Incorrect," the Thorian researcher interjected. "The adaptations are unstable, unpredictable. Without ongoing exposure to human-produced oxygen, the subjects revert or perish." The Veric commander pulsed in what Jack had learned to recognize as resignation. "We remain dependent, but not as we were. Something more significant is occurring." Jack was escorted to a final chamber where a Malorian elder, one who had been among the first to receive oxygen treatments months ago, stood waiting. Unlike normal Malorians, whose communication came through rustling leaves and pheromones, this elder looked directly at Jack and spoke with an actual voice. "The changes go beyond tolerance, Captain Thompson," the elder said, vocal cords that shouldn't exist, producing sounds that shouldn't be possible. "We are becoming something else, not human, but no longer purely what we were." Jack staggered back, the implications staggering. "This is evolution," the elder finished, "accelerated by your toxic gift. The Council fears it, controls it, studies it, but cannot stop it." Within hours, Jack was summoned to an emergency session of the Council, but this time, Earth's leaders joined via secure transmission. The station buzzed with rumors of the changes affecting oxygen-exposed aliens, of powers and abilities emerging that had no precedent in their species' history. The Council chamber had been modified. The The traditional barriers separating species were gone, replaced by a single unified space, where humans and aliens breathed the same carefully balanced atmosphere. The Thorian High Counselor, her exoskeleton now bearing the same unusual markings Jack had seen in the research facility, addressed the assembly. "We stand at a precipice. The oxygen embargo has revealed truths we can no longer ignore. Our species are not merely coexisting, we are converging." She gestured to data projections showing the genetic modifications spreading through alien populations. 10% of oxygen-exposed Council citizens now show adaptive mutations. Projections suggest 50% within a standard year. Earth's president appeared equally shaken by the revelations. "And these changes, they're permanent, irreversible and hereditary," confirmed the Thorian. "The oxygen breathers have not merely joined our galactic community, they have fundamentally altered its future." The Veric commander pulsed forward. "We propose a new compact, not based on resource extraction or control, but on managed transformation. The oxygen breathers have initiated an evolutionary leap we cannot reverse. We must now guide it together." Jack watched in amazement as the Council, the same Council that hours earlier had threatened Earth with subjugation, now proposed partnership out of necessity. The oxygen they had feared, then coveted, then sought to control, had infiltrated their very DNA. "And the military contingent sent to Earth?" Jack demanded. "Recalled," the Veric commander confirmed. "Such measures are counterproductive given our new understanding." The negotiations lasted days. Jack, alongside Earth's diplomatic corps, hammered out an agreement unlike any in galactic history. Not a peace treaty or trade pact, but an evolutionary roadmap, a plan for species that were no longer entirely separate to navigate a shared future. On the final day, as the documents were formalized, Jack stood at the observation dome, gazing at the stars that had become humanity's neighbors. Sarah joined him, her expression thoughtful. "Did you ever imagine it would end like this?" she asked. "When we first stepped out of that pod and they recoiled in horror," Jack shook his head. "I expected fear, then tolerance, perhaps eventually respect. But this?" He gestured to a passing Thorian official, whose exoskeleton now bore oxygen processing membranes. "We didn't just join the galactic community, we transformed it." "And ourselves?" Sarah added quietly. "The new medical technologies they're sharing, the adaptations to our own biology to better withstand their environments. Humans 10 generations from now won't be quite what we are either." It was true. Just as oxygen had changed the aliens, exposure to alien environments and technologies was already altering human physiology in subtle ways. The strict barriers between species were dissolving, not through conquest or subjugation, but through an unstoppable biological dance. Captain Thompson, a young Thorian, approached, her translator deactivated, unnecessary now that she had developed rudimentary vocal cords that could approximate human speech. "The ceremonial integration is about to begin." Jack nodded, following her toward the grand chamber where representatives from all species would breathe the same air for the first time, a carefully calibrated mixture safe for all, toxic for none. As he walked, Jack's mind returned to that first desperate moment when he'd stepped from the human pod and watched aliens flee in terror from his breath. How could he have known then that the very thing they feared would remake, that humanity's poison would become the catalyst for a galactic metamorphosis? The Malorian elder who had spoken to him waited at the entrance to the ceremony, its newly developed voice still rusty but functional. "We feared you would destroy us, oxygen breather," it said quietly. "And in a way you have. What we were ceases to exist with each passing generation." "I'm sorry," Jack offered, meaning it. "Will not be," the elder replied, its leaves rippling. "What dies is stagnation. What emerges is possibility." As they entered the ceremonial chamber, Jack gazed at the assembled beings, humans standing alongside aliens, breathing the same air, their biologies already beginning the long dance of convergence that would continue for millennia, not conquerors or conquered, not harvested resources or reluctant hosts, but partners in an evolutionary journey none had anticipated. The fear that had greeted humanity's first breath among the stars had transformed into a future none could have imagined, where the very toxin that separated them became the catalyst that would ultimately unite them, breath by breath, generation by generation, into something entirely new.